I'll create a 5,000-word historical drama script based on the outline provided, following all your requirements. The winter wind howled across the Kansas plains, carrying with it the bitter cold of December 1944. Inside the sprawling complex of Camp Florence, a prisoner of war facility nestled between frozen cornfields and empty horizons, Nurse Eleanor Hayes pulled her wool
Oh,
coat
she is
tighter against the drafty
beautiful.
corridors of the military hospital.
Just perfect.
Eleanor was 26 years old, though the war had aged her beyond her years. Her hands, once soft and careful, now bore the calluses of endless shifts treating wounded soldiers returning from European battlefields. She had seen men cry for their mothers, had held the hands of boys who would never see home again, and had learned to lock her grief away in a small corner of her heart where it wouldn't interfere with her work. The prisoner of war camp had been established 18 months earlier, housing nearly 3,000 German soldiers captured during the Allied advance through France and Belgium. Most were young men, exhausted and grateful to be far from the front lines. They worked on nearby farms, repaired roads, and existed in a strange limbo between captivity and safety. But today, something unprecedented had arrived at Camp Florence. Eleanor stood in the administrative corridor, listening to raised voices echoing from Colonel Patterson's office. Through the frosted glass, she could see the silhouettes of military physicians gesturing sharply, their disagreement evident even in shadow. "Absolutely not," came the voice of Dr. Hendricks, the senior medical officer. "They are enemy combatants. We provide basic care as required by the Geneva Convention. Nothing more. They're pregnant women." Another voice countered Captain Whitmore, younger and less weathered by bureaucratic thinking. "Some are in their third trimester. If we refuse proper obstetric care, then they should have thought of that before joining the Reich's cause." Dr. Hendricks interrupted coldly. Eleanor's stomach tightened. She had heard rumors all morning, whispers among the orderlies about a transport arriving from a larger facility in Oklahoma. 32 female prisoners, all pregnant, being redistributed across camps as their conditions became more difficult to manage. The office door swung open, and Colonel Patterson emerged, his face carved from granite. He spotted Eleanor immediately. "Nurse Hayes, you're to assist with the intake processing of the new arrivals. They're in Ward C, isolation section. Dr. Hendricks will provide specific protocols." Eleanor nodded stiffly. "Yes, sir." As Patterson strode away, Captain Whitmore stepped into the hallway, his expression troubled. He was 33, with kind eyes that hadn't yet learned to fully harden. He had worked with Eleanor on difficult cases before and trusted her clinical judgment. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "this is going to be complicated. When isn't it?" She tried to smile, but it felt hollow. "No, I mean..." He glanced down the hallway, ensuring they were alone. "The orders are to provide minimal intervention. Standard POW medical care only. No specialized obstetric resources, no priority access to supplies. They're categorized as low-priority patients." Eleanor felt something cold settle in her chest. "Captain, some of those women could deliver within weeks, without proper care." "I know." His voice was barely above a whisper. "But those are the orders." She walked toward Ward C with deliberate steps, each footfall echoing against the tile floors. The isolation section was in the oldest part of the hospital, a converted warehouse with poor heating and minimal privacy. It had been hastily outfitted with metal frame beds and thin mattresses. When Eleanor pushed through the door, she stopped. 32 women sat or lay on narrow cots, their faces pale and drawn. Some were visibly pregnant, their swollen bellies straining against worn prison uniforms. Others held their arms protectively across their bodies, as if trying to shield their unborn children from the cold stares of the American guards stationed at the door. The youngest couldn't have been more than 20. The oldest, perhaps 40. They were thin. Too thin. And their eyes held that particular hollowness Eleanor had seen in refugees and soldiers alike, the look of people who had lost everything except the raw instinct to survive. One woman near the front met Eleanor's gaze. She had blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, and her hand rested on her belly in an unconscious gesture of protection. Despite the prison uniform and the exhaustion etched into her features, there was dignity in the way she held herself. Eleanor swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her uniform, her nationality, her role as both healer and enemy. The war had followed her into this room, and she didn't know which side her oath as a nurse placed her on. The briefing room smelled of stale coffee and mimeograph ink. Eleanor sat beside Nurse Catherine Miller, her closest friend among the staff. Catherine was 31, a widow whose husband had died at Normandy. She approached her work with fierce professionalism, as if staying busy could outrun her grief. Dr. Hendricks stood at the front of the room, a clipboard in his weathered hands. Behind him, a map of the camp showed the isolation ward marked in red. The prisoners in Ward C are to receive standard care, as outlined in Protocol 7B, he began, his tone clinical and detached. This includes basic hygiene facilities, adequate nutrition per caloric requirements, and emergency medical intervention in cases of life-threatening complications. Eleanor raised her hand. What about prenatal examinations? Monitoring fetal development? Dr. Hendricks' jaw tightened. Nurse Hayes, these women are prisoners of war. They are not patients in a civilian maternity ward. We allocate our resources to American servicemen first, Allied personnel second, and prisoners of war last. That hierarchy is not negotiable. WWII, that will be all, Nurse Hayes. Catherine touched Eleanor's arm, a silent warning to stop pushing. After the briefing, they walked together toward the nurses' station. The December afternoon was already darkening, casting long shadows across the snow-covered grounds. You can't challenge him directly, Catherine said quietly. Hendricks has the colonel's ear. If you make yourself a problem, they'll transfer you, and then those women will have no advocate at all. Eleanor knew Catherine was right, but the knowledge sat like lead in her stomach. We took an oath, Kath, to do no harm, to care for the sick and vulnerable. They're the enemy, Catherine replied, though her voice lacked conviction. Are they? Eleanor stopped walking, forcing Catherine to meet her eyes. Look at them. Really look. They're terrified pregnant women, far from home, completely at our mercy. What threat do they pose? Catherine's expression softened. I know. I saw them too. She paused, then added, There's a woman in bed 14, Anna Keller. She's 7 months along, and her blood pressure is elevated. I checked her chart. She's had no prenatal care since arriving in the States 3 months ago. 3 months? Eleanor felt anger flare in her chest. That's criminal negligence. It's wartime protocol. Catherine's voice was bitter. Everything is different in war. We're supposed to forget they're human, and remember they're German. That evening, Eleanor made her rounds in Ward C. Most of the women watched her with wary silence, their expressions guarded. They had learned not to expect kindness from their captors. Anna Keller lay on her cot, one hand pressed against her lower back. She was perhaps 24, with delicate features and eyes the color of winter sky. When Eleanor approached, Anna's body tensed. I'm Nurse Hayes, Eleanor said gently, keeping her voice low and non-threatening. I need to check your vital signs. Anna didn't respond, but she didn't resist when Eleanor took her pulse. Her heartbeat was rapid, too rapid, and her ankles were swollen with edema. You're having pain? Eleanor asked, gesturing to Anna's back. For a long moment, Anna said nothing. Then, in heavily accented English, it is, always, the pain. How long? 2 weeks. Maybe more. Anna's eyes filled with tears she was trying desperately to hold back. Please. My baby is okay? Eleanor felt something crack inside her chest. She thought of her younger sister, who had just given birth to a healthy daughter in Ohio. She thought of the joy and celebration, the hospital room filled with flowers, the skilled obstetrician who had monitored every stage of the pregnancy. And here was Anna, alone in a foreign country, imprisoned, in pain, begging for the most basic assurance that her child would survive. Eleanor made a decision in that moment, one that would change everything. I'm going to help you, she said quietly. I promise. Anna's tears spilled over. Thank you, she whispered in German, then again in broken English. Thank you. As Eleanor walked away from the ward that night, she knew she was crossing a line. The rules were clear. The orders were explicit. But somewhere between her training and this moment, she had learned that following orders and doing the right thing were not always the same. She found Catherine in the nurse's lounge, drinking tea that had long gone cold. "I need your help," Eleanor said without preamble. "And I need you not to ask too many questions." Catherine looked up, studied her friend's face, and set down her cup. "All right," she said simply. "What do we need to do?" The abandoned supply room in the East Wing had been forgotten by everyone except the custodial staff. It was small, perhaps 15 feet by 20, with a single window that looked out onto the empty fields beyond the camp perimeter. During the day, weak winter sunlight filtered through the frosted glass. At night, it was dark and silent. Perfect. Eleanor stood in the doorway, mentally cataloging what they would need. Catherine stood beside her, arms crossed, her practical mind already solving logistical problems. "We'll need at least 3 beds, Catherine said. "Proper mattresses, not the thin ones from the ward. Clean linens. And we'll need to requisition supplies without raising suspicion." "I can get most of it from the overflow storage," Eleanor replied. "The inventory system is a mess. No one's going to notice a few missing items." "What about sterilization equipment? Instruments?" Eleanor had already thought of this. "Dr. Brennan in surgery owes me a favor. I covered his shift when his daughter was sick. He might look the other way if I borrow some equipment." "Might? Will." Eleanor tried to sound more confident than she felt. "He's a good man." Over the next 3 days, they worked in stolen moments between shifts. Eleanor smuggled in armloads of linens, hiding them beneath laundry carts. Catherine misplaced boxes of gauze and surgical gloves, relocating them to their secret room. They scrubbed the floors with bleach until the harsh chemical smell made their eyes water, disinfecting every surface twice. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, a young guard who worked the night shift, discovered them on the 3rd night. Eleanor froze when she heard his boots in the hallway. She had been carrying a portable examination lamp, holding it awkwardly under her coat. There was no innocent explanation for what she was doing in this abandoned wing at midnight. Webb appeared in the doorway, his flashlight sweeping across the now clean room, the 3 beds arranged against the wall, the neat stacks of supplies. "Nurse Hayes." His voice was flat, unreadable. "What is this?" Eleanor's mind raced through possible lies, but looking at Webb's young face, he couldn't have been more than 22. She chose honesty instead. "It's a delivery room, Lieutenant, for the prisoners in Ward C." Webb's expression didn't change. "That's against protocol." "I know. I should report this." "You should." Eleanor set down the lamp, straightening to face him fully. "But those women are going to give birth in the next few weeks, Lieutenant. Some of them are high risk. Without proper facilities, without adequate care, some of them will die. Their babies will die." Webb shifted uncomfortably. "They're enemy soldiers. They're pregnant women." Eleanor's voice was steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. And a heartbeat is a heartbeat, no matter the uniform. The silence stretched between them. Catherine had materialized behind Eleanor. Her presence, a silent show of solidarity. Finally, Webb spoke. "My sister just had a baby, last month, in Virginia." His voice was quieter now. "It was complicated. She hemorrhaged. If the doctors hadn't been there, hadn't had the right equipment," he trailed off, his jaw working. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said softly. "She's fine now. Baby too." Webb looked at the room again, then back at Eleanor. "I'm not going to report this, but you need to be careful. If Colonel Patterson finds out..." "I know." Webb nodded once, then turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the empty corridor. Catherine released a breath she'd been holding. That was too close. "It's going to get closer," Eleanor replied. But there was no turning back now. The following evening, Eleanor approached Dr. Samuel Brennan in the surgeon's locker room. He was 53, with gray hair and steady hands that had performed countless operations. He listened without interrupting as she explained what she needed. When she finished, Brennan was quiet for a long moment. "You're asking me to violate direct orders," he finally said. "I'm asking you to be a doctor." Brennan's weathered face creased into something between a smile and a grimace. "You're going to get us all court-martialed, Hayes." "Probably." He reached into his locker and pulled out a set of surgical instruments, wrapped in sterile cloth. "These are old. Due to be retired anyway. If anyone asks, they were disposed of according to protocol." Eleanor took the bundle with shaking hands. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Brennan said. "And Hayes? When this goes sideways and it will, don't mention my name." But his eyes were kind when he said it. The call came at 2 in the morning on January 7th, 1945. Eleanor was asleep in the nurse's dormitory when Catherine shook her awake. "It's Anna," Catherine whispered urgently. Her water broke. "She's having contractions every 5 minutes. Eleanor was dressed and moving within seconds, her training overriding the fog of sleep. They hurried through the dark corridors, their flashlights creating small pools of light in the winter darkness. In Ward C, Anna lay on her cot, her face pale and slick with sweat. She was biting down on a folded cloth, trying not to cry out. The other prisoners watched from their beds, their faces filled with fear and helpless concern. "We need to move her," Eleanor said quietly to Catherine. Now, they had prepared a wheelchair for this moment. Working together, they helped Anna into it, moving as quickly as they dared. The guards at the ward entrance watched but said nothing. Lieutenant Webb had spoken to them, though Eleanor didn't know what he'd said. The abandoned supply room, their secret delivery room, was warm. They had managed to relocate a small heating unit, and it hummed quietly in the corner. Clean white sheets covered the examination table they'd repurposed as a delivery bed. Anna clutched Eleanor's hand as another contraction seized her. "Too early," she gasped in German, then English. "Baby is too early." "Shh," Eleanor soothed, brushing damp hair back from Anna's forehead. "You're going to be fine. We're going to take care of you." Outside, snow fell in thick curtains, muffling the world in white silence. In the distance, so faint it might have been imagined, came the sound of aircraft American bombers heading east toward the war that seemed both impossibly far and terribly close. Catherine prepared the instruments while Eleanor examined Anna. 7 centimeters dilated. The baby's heartbeat was strong. Eleanor could hear it through her stethoscope, that rapid flutter that meant life. "You're doing beautifully," Eleanor encouraged. "Just breathe. In through your nose, out through your mouth." Anna followed the instructions, her eyes locked on Eleanor's face, as if it were the only anchor in a stormy sea. The delivery took 4 hours. Anna labored through the darkest part of the night, when the world outside was silent, except for the wind and the distant howl of a train whistle. Eleanor coached her through each contraction, each push, while Catherine monitored vitals and prepared for any complications. At 6:15 in the morning, as the first gray light of dawn touched the window, Anna gave one final, shuddering push, and the baby cried. The sound split the air, a thin, indignant wail that spoke of life and breath and possibility. Eleanor caught the infant, a tiny girl with a shock of dark hair and furious little fists, and felt tears streaming down her own face. "It's a girl," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Anna, you have a daughter." Anna was sobbing and laughing at the same time, her arms reaching for her child. Eleanor placed the baby on Anna's chest and watched as the young mother curled around her daughter, whispering words in German that needed no translation. Catherine was crying too, Eleanor noticed. They stood together in that small, warm room, witnessing something that transcended war and nationality and hatred, the pure, uncomplicated miracle of birth. The door opened quietly. Eleanor's heart stopped, certain they had been discovered. But it was only Dr. Brennan, still in his surgical coat, his eyes tired but soft. "I heard," he said simply. "Is everyone all right?" "Yes," Eleanor managed. "Everyone's fine." Brennan stepped closer, examining the newborn with professional care. "Good color, strong cry. Weight looks adequate." He glanced at Anna, who was watching him with cautious eyes. "You did well," he told her, and though she might not have understood all his words, she understood his tone. After Brennan left, promising to falsify the records to show Anna had delivered in the regular ward, Eleanor sat beside the new mother. Anna had fallen into an exhausted sleep, her daughter nestled against her. Eleanor thought about her own family back in Ohio. She thought about the letters from her brother, fighting somewhere in France. She thought about all the reasons she should hate this woman and her child. But all she felt, looking at them in the soft morning light, was a fierce, protective love that had nothing to do with sides or flags or wars. News traveled fast in Camp Florence, carried on whispers and knowing glances. By the afternoon of Anna's delivery, every nurse on staff knew what had happened. By evening, the guards knew. By the next morning, some of the American administrative staff had heard rumors of the secret delivery room in the abandoned East Wing. The response was not what Eleanor had expected. Nurse Patricia Reynolds approached her during the lunch shift, carrying a canvas bag. Patricia was 42, stern-faced, and had never been particularly friendly with Eleanor. She set the bag on Eleanor's desk without a word. Inside were baby clothes, tiny, hand-knitted, in soft white wool. "My daughter outgrew them," Patricia said gruffly. "Seemed a waste to just keep them in storage." Eleanor looked up, surprised. "Patricia, don't make a thing of it, Hayes. They're just clothes." But Patricia's eyes were softer than her words. Over the next week, a quiet rebellion began to take shape. Sergeant Thomas Griggs, a supply officer who had lost his own son to scarlet fever 3 years earlier, began accidentally misplacing extra blankets, bottles of powdered milk, and medical supplies. He would leave them in unmarked boxes outside the nurse's station with no explanation. Private David Chen, who worked in the camp kitchen, started preparing extra portions of nutritious food, vegetable soup, protein-rich stews, milk, and ensuring it reached Ward C without going through official requisition channels. Lieutenant Webb organized a rotation of guards sympathetic to the cause, men who understood that compassion wasn't weakness and that mercy didn't equal betrayal. Even some of the prisoners in the main camp, the German soldiers who worked the farms and workshops, began to change. They had heard about Anna and her baby, heard about the American nurses who had risked everything to help. One afternoon, Eleanor found a small wooden cradle outside the delivery room door. It was beautifully crafted, with smooth joints and careful detailing. A note attached read simply, "Danke. Thank you." Catherine traced her fingers over the wood. "One of the carpenters from the workshop detail must have made it," she said quietly. "They're skilled workers, they made this in secret. During their own time." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. "I don't understand any of this anymore, Kath. Who are the enemies? Who are the allies? Maybe that's the point," Catherine replied. "Maybe war forces us to create categories that don't really exist." But not everyone was sympathetic. Major Frank Dixon, the camp's executive officer, had been away on leave during Anna's delivery. When he returned and learned what had happened, his fury was immediate and volcanic. He summoned Eleanor to his office on January 20th. Dixon was 58, career military, with a face carved from granite and a voice that could strip paint. He stood behind his desk like a judge preparing to pass sentence. "Nurse Hayes, you have violated direct orders, misappropriated military resources, and engaged in conduct unbecoming of a United States Army nurse." His words were clipped and precise. "Do you deny these charges?" Eleanor stood at attention, her hands steady despite the fear coursing through her. "No, sir. I don't deny them." "Then you understand that I have grounds for immediate court-martial." "Yes, sir." Dixon's jaw worked. "Why did you do it? What possible justification?" "Because she was a pregnant woman in labor. And I'm a nurse," Eleanor interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "Because my oath to do no harm doesn't include a clause about checking nationality first. Because if we stop seeing people as people, then we've already lost this war in the only way that really matters." The silence in the office was absolute. Finally, Dixon spoke, his voice lower. "I could end your career. Hayes?" "I know, sir. You put yourself and everyone who helped you at risk." "Yes, sir." Dixon turned away, looking out the window at the snow-covered camp. "My wife died in childbirth," he said quietly. 23 years ago. They couldn't save her. Couldn't save the baby either. He was silent for a long moment. I think about that sometimes. About how having the right help, the right care, might have made the difference. Eleanor waited, barely breathing. Dixon turned back to her. You're to cease all unauthorized activities immediately. Ward C will receive standard care only, as outlined in existing protocols. Do I make myself clear? Yes, sir. However, Dixon's voice carried a new edge. I find that standard care for pregnant women naturally includes appropriate obstetric monitoring and delivery assistance. The protocols are open to interpretation, after all. Eleanor felt hope flare in her chest. Sir, you will document everything properly, Nurse Hayes. Every supply, every procedure. We're going to do this by the book. We're just going to read the book, a little more generously. Dixon's expression remained stern, but something in his eyes had softened. And if anyone questions my interpretation of the regulations, they can take it up with me directly. Thank you, sir, Eleanor managed. Don't thank me yet. We still have 31 more women who are going to need help. Dixon sat down heavily. Now get out of my office before I remember I'm supposed to be angry. Despite Major Dixon's tacit approval, not everyone at Camp Florence supported what Eleanor and her team were doing. The ideological battle lines within the camp became increasingly clear as more pregnancies advanced. Dr. Hendricks remained the most vocal opponent. In late January, he formally requested a review board to investigate what he called gross violations of wartime medical protocols and an unconscionable allocation of resources to enemy personnel. The hearing was scheduled for February 3rd. Eleanor spent the night before unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling of her dormitory room. Catherine lay in the next bed, equally wakeful. They could discharge you, Catherine said into the darkness. Strip your nursing credentials. Maybe worse. I know. Was it worth it? Eleanor thought of Anna's baby, now 3 weeks old and thriving. She thought of the other women in Ward C, whose fear had transformed into cautious hope. She thought of the guards and nurses who had found their own humanity again in the act of helping. Yes, she said. Even if everything falls apart tomorrow, yes, it was worth it. The review board convened in the camp's administrative building. Colonel Patterson presided, flanked by 2 other senior officers brought in from Fort Leavenworth. Dr. Hendricks presented his case with clinical precision, citing regulation after regulation that Eleanor had violated. The nurse in question has demonstrated a pattern of insubordination, Hendricks concluded. She has prioritized enemy prisoners over American personnel, misused military resources, and created a security risk by establishing unauthorized relationships with POWs. Eleanor sat ramrod straight, her hands folded in her lap. Then it was her turn to speak. She stood, acutely aware of every eye in the room. Gentlemen, I am a United States Army nurse. I took an oath to care for the sick and wounded, to do no harm, to uphold the highest standards of my profession. Her voice was steady, though her heart hammered. At no point in my training did anyone specify that these principles apply only to American citizens. The regulations clearly state, Hendricks began. I'm not finished, Doctor. Eleanor turned to face him directly. You argue that I prioritized prisoners over American personnel. That's not accurate. I provided care that no American soldier needed or requested. There was no one else waiting for a delivery room. No American serviceman was denied care so that Anna Keller could have a safe birth. She turned back to the board. You're right that I violated protocol. I did. I made that choice consciously, knowing the risks. But I'd like to ask this board a question. What would you have me do? Stand by and watch women die in childbirth? Let infants be born in unsanitary conditions without proper medical support? Is that what we're fighting for? Is that the America we represent? The room was silent. Then, unexpectedly, Captain Whitmore stood. If I may address the board, he said. I've served as a military physician for 12 years. I've treated casualties from North Africa, Sicily, and France. I've seen what this war does to people, both the killing and the dying. His voice carried weight earned through experience. Nurse Hayes's actions were irregular. Yes, but they were not wrong. Colonel Patterson leaned forward. Captain, that's a fine distinction. Perhaps, sir. But it's an important one. Whitmore glanced at Eleanor, then continued. I lost my son 3 years ago. He was 2 years old. Pneumonia. His voice caught slightly, then steadied. The night he died, I wasn't there. I was here, at this camp, following regulations and doing my duty. And I wonder sometimes whether I was a better officer for it or just a worse father. The silence that followed was profound. Finally, a voice spoke from the back of the room. Eleanor turned, surprised to see Dr. Brennan standing. If I may, Colonel, I believe there's a medical principle relevant to this discussion. Primum non nocere. First, do no harm. Brennan stepped forward. Nurse Hayes didn't violate that principle. She upheld it. And if following regulations means abandoning that principle, then perhaps we need to reconsider the regulations. Colonel Patterson looked between the assembled officers, then at Eleanor. Nurse Hayes, you will remain at your post, he said finally. However, you will submit weekly reports documenting all obstetric care provided to prisoners. These reports will go directly to Major Dixon and myself. We will establish proper channels for this care, within the bounds of military regulation. He paused. And Nurse Hayes, don't make me regret this decision. No, sir, Eleanor said, relief flooding through her. Thank you, sir. Dr. Hendrick's face was rigid with fury, but he said nothing. As Eleanor left the room, Catherine caught her arm. You did it, she whispered. We did it, Eleanor corrected. All of us. February brought a thaw, both in weather and in hearts. 5 more babies were born in the delivery room that Eleanor and Catherine had created. Each birth was different, some quick and uncomplicated, others requiring hours of careful intervention. But all were successful. 31 women had arrived at Camp Florence pregnant. Now, 6 healthy infants slept in makeshift cribs while their mothers recovered. Eleanor found herself developing relationships with the women that transcended the prisoner-nurse dynamic. She learned their names, their stories, the circumstances that had brought them into the war's machinery. Anna Keller had been a teacher in Munich before the war. She spoke wistful English about her classroom, the children she'd taught, the life that now seemed like it had belonged to someone else entirely. Greta Hoffman, who delivered twins in early February, had been a factory worker, conscripted into service when her husband was sent to the Eastern Front. She didn't know if he was alive. Liesel Werner was the youngest, barely 21, and she cried herself to sleep most nights. Her baby, a boy, had his father's eyes, and his father had died in Normandy. One evening, Eleanor sat with Anna in the small recovery area they'd established adjacent to the delivery room. Anna was teaching her daughter a German lullaby, her voice soft and melodic. Will you teach me? Eleanor asked. Anna looked surprised, then smiled a real smile that transformed her tired face. Yes, of course. She sang the first verse slowly. Guten Abend, gute Nacht, mit Rosen bedacht. Good evening, good night, Anna translated. With roses covered, Eleanor listened, then tried to repeat the words. Her accent was terrible, and Anna laughed a sound of pure, uncomplicated joy that Eleanor realized she hadn't heard in months. Better, Anna encouraged. Try again. They spent the next hour trading songs, Anna teaching Eleanor German lullabies, Eleanor sharing American ones. When they sang Hush Little Baby together, Anna stumbled over the English words, and they both dissolved into laughter. Catherine found them there, singing and laughing, and stopped in the doorway. Later, she told Eleanor, for a moment, I forgot where we were. I forgot about the war. It was just 2 mothers sharing songs. Anna's not my child, Eleanor pointed out. No, Catherine agreed. But you care for her like she is. The transformation extended beyond the delivery room. In the main camp, German prisoners who had once viewed their American captors with sullen resentment now approached guards with cautious gratitude. Sergeant Griggs reported that work detail productivity had increased. The prisoners were volunteering for extra tasks, showing initiative and cooperation that had been absent before. It's like they remember they're human, Griggs told Eleanor one afternoon. Like they remember we're human too. Even some of the local townspeople, initially hostile to the idea of a POW camp in their community, began to soften. Mrs. Helen Cartwright, who ran the general store in Florence, donated a box of baby clothes and blankets. She didn't explain her change of heart, but Eleanor learned later that Mrs. Cartwright's daughter lived in Germany with her German husband and hadn't been heard from since 1943. In March, a reporter from the Kansas City Star arrived at the camp, having heard rumors of the unusual situation. Major Dixon carefully managed the interview, emphasizing the camp's commitment to humanitarian standards and proper treatment of prisoners under the Geneva Convention. The article that appeared on March 15th was titled "Angels of Camp Florence: How Army Nurses Brought Compassion to POW Facility." Eleanor read it with mixed feelings. The attention was unwelcome. She'd never sought recognition, but perhaps it would provide some protection for their work. The response was immediate and divided. Some readers sent letters of support. "Thank you for showing the world that America doesn't abandon its principles even in wartime." Others sent angry denunciations. "Those nurses should be ashamed. We're at war with Germany, not running a charity for our enemies." But the most meaningful response came from unexpected sources. A letter arrived from Virginia, addressed to the nurses of Camp Florence. It was signed by 37 women, all mothers of servicemen. The letter read, "We are grateful that someone is showing mercy to mothers and children, even enemy mothers and children. If our sons are captured, we pray they receive the same compassion. You honor America by remembering that we fight for human dignity, not against it." Eleanor pinned the letter on the wall of the nurses' station, where it remained for the rest of the war. The delicate balance at Camp Florence shattered in early April when a military journalist from the Army's Public Affairs Office arrived unannounced. Captain Ronald Martinez was 35, ambitious, and looking for a story that would advance his career. He had read the Kansas City Star article and smelled something bigger. Controversy, drama, potential scandal. He arrived with orders from Washington to conduct a comprehensive review of prisoner treatment at Camp Florence. Major Dixon tried to control the narrative, but Martinez was skilled at finding cracks in official stories. He interviewed guards, administrative staff, and prisoners. He photographed Ward C, the delivery room, the 6 infants now thriving under Eleanor's care. His report, submitted to Army headquarters on April 20th, was explosive. Female POWs receive preferential treatment at Kansas facility. Read the headline in the leaked summary. The report questioned whether resources were being diverted from American servicemen to enemy prisoners, whether fraternization guidelines were being violated, whether national security was being compromised. The story hit the national newspapers 3 days later. Suddenly, Camp Florence was national news. Radio commentators debated the ethics. Members of Congress demanded investigations. Veterans groups issued statements both supporting and condemning Eleanor's actions. The backlash was swift and vicious. Eleanor received threatening letters. Someone threw a rock through the window of her dormitory room with a note attached. Traitor. Catherine was spat on when she went into town for supplies, but the support was equally strong. Telegrams arrived from nursing organizations, women's groups, and religious leaders praising their courage. The American Nurses Association issued a statement defending Eleanor's actions as consistent with professional ethics. On May 1st, Eleanor was summoned to Washington to testify before a congressional subcommittee investigating wartime prisoner treatment. She traveled by train, watching the country roll past her window, farmland giving way to cities, spring blossoming across the landscape. Catherine came with her, along with Major Dixon, who had been ordered to explain his command decisions. The hearing room was packed with spectators, journalists, and politicians. Eleanor sat at a long table facing rows of congressmen, feeling small and exposed. Congressman Walter Hayes, no relation, from Ohio, led the questioning. He was 63, with white hair and a voice like gravel. "Nurse Hayes, did you knowingly violate Army regulations regarding prisoner treatment?" "Yes, sir, I did." "Why?" Eleanor took a breath. She had prepared for this, had rehearsed her answers with Catherine and Dixon. But now, Facing these men who held her future in their hands, she abandoned the script, because regulations, sir, are written by people who aren't in the room when a 20-year-old woman is dying in childbirth. They're written by people who don't have to look into the eyes of a mother begging you to save her baby. Her voice was steady, clear. I didn't violate regulations because I don't respect authority. I violated them because, in that moment, my oath as a nurse demanded something different than my orders as a soldier. You put your duty as a nurse above your duty as an American officer? I put my duty as a human being above bureaucratic procedure, sir. A murmur ran through the room. Congressman Hayes leaned back. You realize that's a dangerous precedent. If every soldier could simply decide which orders to follow based on personal ethics, with respect, sir, that's exactly what we ask soldiers to do every day. Eleanor met his gaze directly. We expect them to follow lawful orders but refuse unlawful ones. We expect them to fight with honor, even against dishonorable enemies. We don't give them clear rules for every situation. We give them values, and trust them to apply those values under impossible circumstances. Another congressman, younger, spoke up. Miss Hayes, some have argued that your actions gave comfort to the enemy. Did I? Eleanor's voice was quiet but firm. 6 women gave birth safely. 6 infants survived. Not one of them is a threat to the United States. Not one of them chose this war. And if showing mercy to mothers and babies is giving comfort to the enemy, then perhaps we need to reconsider who our enemy actually is. The hearing lasted 4 hours. They questioned Eleanor, Catherine, Major Dixon, and Dr. Brennan, who had also been called to testify. The congressman probed every decision, every violation, every dollar spent on unauthorized care. Finally, at 6 in the evening, the chairman called for a recess. Eleanor was exhausted, emotionally drained, uncertain of anything except that she had told the truth. That night, staying in a modest Washington hotel, she couldn't sleep. Catherine sat with her, and they talked about everything and nothing about nursing school, about the lives they'd left behind, about whether they'd done the right thing, even if they destroy us for it, Catherine said quietly. At least we know we tried to be decent. That counts for something. The subcommittee's verdict came 2 days later. No charges would be filed, but Eleanor would be formally reprimanded, and her actions would be noted in her service record. Major Dixon received a similar reprimand for inadequate supervision. It was, in military terms, a slap on the wrist, but the court of public opinion remained divided. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. Camp Florence began the process of repatriation, sending prisoners home to a Germany that had been shattered by defeat. The women of Ward C were among the first to be processed, classified as low-security prisoners who posed no threat. Eleanor helped Anna pack her few belongings. The baby Sophie, Anna had named her, was now 4 months old, healthy and alert. She grasped Eleanor's finger with tiny, perfect hands. I don't know how to thank you, Anna said. Her English much improved after months of daily conversation. You saved us. Sophie and me. We would have died. You would have survived, Eleanor said gently. You're stronger than you know. No. Anna shook her head. Without you. Without Catherine. Without all of you. Her eyes filled with tears. You didn't have to help us. We were the enemy. But you saw us as mothers, as women, as human. They embraced. 2 women who had started as enemies and ended as something deeper than friends, bound by shared experience that transcended the war's artificial divisions. Take care of Sophie, Eleanor whispered. Tell her about Kansas. Tell her about the people who helped bring her into the world. I will, Anna promised. And Eleanor. She pulled back, meeting Eleanor's eyes. Thank you. For showing me that not all Americans are the enemy, just as not all Germans are. Thank you for helping me remember that humanity is stronger than hatred. Eleanor watched as the transport trucks carried the women away, back toward the East Coast where ships would take them home. She stood until the vehicles disappeared beyond the horizon, feeling the weight of their absence. Life at Camp Florence returned to routine. The delivery room was converted back to storage. Eleanor and Catherine continued their work with military efficiency, though something had changed in them both a quiet confidence that they had faced an impossible choice and chosen correctly. The years passed. Eleanor returned to civilian life, working at a hospital in Cleveland. She married late at 33 to a quiet man named Thomas who asked about the scar on her hand from broken glass during a supply run and listened to her story without judgment. In 1947, Eleanor received the first letter. It was from Anna, postmarked Berlin. Inside was a photograph. Anna and Sophie standing in front of a partially rebuilt building, both smiling. Sophie was 2 years old, chubby and bright-eyed. "We are surviving," Anna wrote. "Germany is broken, but we are rebuilding. Sophie is healthy and happy. She knows your name. I tell her about you often. About the American nurse who risked everything to bring her safely into the world." More letters followed over the years. In 1952, Anna wrote to say she had remarried a schoolteacher named Johann, who had lost his wife during the war. "We are helping each other heal," she wrote. In 1958, Sophie was 13, and her school photograph showed a confident young woman with her mother's eyes and smile. In 1963, Sophie wrote her own letter. "Dear Mrs. Hayes, my mother has told me so many stories about you. I wanted to write and tell you that I've decided to study medicine. I want to be a pediatrician, a doctor for children. My mother says I chose this because of you, because of the story of my birth. She says you showed her that the best response to hatred is to choose love, and the best response to war is to create life." Eleanor kept every letter in a wooden box on her dresser. Sometimes, late at night, she would take them out and reread them, marveling at the ripple effects of one choice, one act of defiance against regulations that valued rules over life. Other letters arrived too, from Greta and Liesel and the other women she had helped. They sent photographs of their children growing up, the infants she had delivered now becoming teenagers, then adults, building lives in a world slowly healing from war's wounds. In 1970, Eleanor received a letter that made her weep. It was from Dr. Sophie Keller, now a practicing pediatrician in Munich. "I have delivered my first baby," Sophie wrote. "A healthy girl, born to a Turkish immigrant family. The mother didn't speak German, and the family was poor, barely tolerated by our community. But I thought of you, Mrs. Hayes, and what you taught my mother, that a life is a life, regardless of politics or nationality. I gave that family the same care I would give anyone. And when the baby cried when she took her first breath, I understood what my mother meant when she said that you had saved not just our lives, but our faith in humanity." Eleanor sat in her living room, holding the letter with shaking hands. Thomas found her there, tears streaming down her face. "Good news?" he asked gently. "The best news," Eleanor managed. "Proof that choosing compassion matters, that it ripples outward in ways we can never fully measure." In 1989, Eleanor was 71 years old. The Berlin Wall fell that November, and she watched the footage on television with tears in her eyes. The following spring, she received an unexpected letter. It was from Sophie, now 55 and a senior physician at Munich Children's Hospital. "I know this is a tremendous request," Sophie wrote, "but I would like to organize a reunion, not just my mother and me, but all of us, the women you helped, their children, and the children's children. We want to thank you properly. We want you to see what your choice created." Eleanor's hands trembled as she read. Thomas had passed away 2 years earlier, and her children were grown with families of their own. She had few ties keeping her in Cleveland, few reasons not to go. In July 1990, Eleanor traveled to Germany for the first time in her life. The reunion was held in a church hall in Munich. When Eleanor entered, 43 people stood to greet her mothers, children, grandchildren, all connected by one winter at Camp Florence 45 years earlier. Anna, now 69, embraced her first. "My friend," she whispered. "Thank you for coming." Eleanor met Sophie in person for the first time, a distinguished woman with kind eyes, who gripped Eleanor's hands and said, "You changed the trajectory of my entire life, not just by saving it, but by showing my mother that mercy is stronger than hatred." They spent 2 days together, sharing meals and stories. Eleanor learned that Greta's twins had become engineers who worked on rebuilding infrastructure in East Germany. Liesel's son was a teacher who specialized in peace education. Every child, every grandchild, had been shaped by the story of their birth, by the knowledge that American nurses had chosen compassion over enmity. On the final evening, they gathered for a formal dinner. Sophie stood to speak. When my mother told me the story of my birth, I didn't understand it at first. I was young. I thought the world was simple, divided into good people and bad people, friends and enemies. She looked at Eleanor. But my mother taught me that you, Mrs. Hayes, saw something more important than those divisions. You saw mothers. You saw babies. You saw human beings worthy of dignity and care, regardless of the politics that surrounded us. Sophie's voice grew stronger. Because of that choice, I'm here. My children are here. She gestured to the room. All of us exist because you and your colleagues chose to honor life over hatred. You taught us that compassion is not weakness, that mercy is not betrayal, that healing transcends the boundaries we create. Eleanor stood, overwhelmed by emotion. She looked at these faces, these lives she had helped begin, and saw the future that her choice had made possible. I was just doing my job, she said quietly. No, Anna said, also standing. You were doing something far more important. You were being human. They took a photograph that evening. Eleanor, surrounded by the women she had helped. Their children. Their children's children. 3 generations bound by one moment of mercy in a Kansas winter 45 years before. When Eleanor returned to America, she brought the photograph with her. It sat on her mantle until her death in 1998 at the age of 80. At her funeral, her daughter read letters from Germany from families who had never met Eleanor but whose existence traced back to her choice. Sophie spoke via recorded message, her voice clear and strong. My mother Anna used to say that the war ended not when the treaties were signed, but when people chose to see each other as human beings first. Eleanor Hayes made that choice. She chose life over regulation, compassion over convenience, hope over hatred. And because of that choice, generations exist who might not have. We are her legacy, not just the living, but the living reminder that choosing humanity always matters. The photograph from the Munich reunion was displayed at the service. 43 faces, 3 generations, all smiling. Proof that one nurse's decision in a winter storm had rippled across decades and oceans, creating waves of compassion that the war's architects never intended and could never destroy. Eleanor had often wondered whether following her conscience instead of orders had been the right choice. In the end, the answer was written not in regulations or military records, but in the faces of children and grandchildren who existed because their mothers had been treated with dignity in their most vulnerable moments. A heartbeat is a heartbeat, no matter the uniform. Eleanor had lived by those words, and 43 people lived because of them.